Pokemon, Pokemon, Pokemon. It is amazing seeing how a video game about catching creatures and battling with them would turn into a global empire. When you start off with a bang with the original Red and Blue or Red and Green in Japan on the Game Boy to Gold, Silver, and Crystal on the Game Boy Color, expectations are sky high once the Game Boy Advance was first unveiled. Although the first mainline Pokemon games on the Game Boy Advance were Ruby and Sapphire, the third generation of Pokemon games were probably best defined by the third game set in the Hoenn region, Emerald. Now, we are in 2020 and the latest games, Pokemon Sword and Shield, are set to have DLC content be released in the coming months. But we're not here to talk about Sword and Shield. We're here to talk about what I personally think is my favorite Pokemon game ever, Emerald. Now, right now it's 2020, as I said, and 15 years ago was when this game first released. So it begs the question, is Pokemon Emerald still a good game nowadays? A good Pokemon game? Well, I suggest you guys go out, buy a copy on Amazon, and it costs how much? On second thought, how about we both play together and find out, alright? Cool? Let's find out. Now, I may hear some of you asking, Emerald is your favorite? Why not games like Crystal or Red and Blue? Well, to be honest, growing up, I never actually played any of them. The only Pokemon games I had growing up were actually the trading card game, video game, and the puzzle challenge games, both of which I loved back then and still love to this day. I even bought them on the Nintendo 3DS eShop years later, and they're cheap, very fun, and I highly recommend them. But back to Emerald. I actually first had Ruby and Sapphire as my first mainline Pokemon games, but Emerald combines the story elements from both Ruby and Sapphire, adds more Pokemon to the roster of catchable Pokemon, provides a lot more content, and an incredible post-game battle facility, which I will get to later on. At first glance, Emerald has a lot of things going for it. The graphics are appealing, a definite step up from Gold, Silver, and Crystal. The music is great. A lot of the Pokemon native to the Hoenn region where the game takes place may not have a ton of beloved Pokemon from past games, so makes up for it with a ton of new Pokemon that people still love to this day. Some of them include the Ralts family line, the Shroomish line, the Aron line, Electrike, all of which you can catch before you can get your third gym badge. But I'm getting a bit ahead of myself because the start of the game already has a lot to take in. You start off with your character riding the back of a moving truck, and no, you're not being kidnapped and being held for ransom. You're actually moving into the Hoenn region and into the small town of Littleroot. Also, before anyone asks, that little white stop at the top of your character's head, that's a hat. It's not hair, and for years I thought it was hair. Did anybody else think that too for a long time? After setting up the clock in your room, you're treated to a small cutscene where you're watching a news report of your dad, who is actually the gym leader at Petalburg City. So already you have new elements introduced. Not only do you actually have a dad, which means no more surprise visits from Professor Oak to your mom, if you know what I mean, but your father is also a gym leader, which means you will have to fight him in a Pokemon battle later in the game, which is really cool and adds a bit of a personal stake to your eventual adventure. From then onwards, you go through more or less the same start to any Pokemon game up to this point. At first, you can't venture out into the tall grass, you're then sent to find the professor, which in this game is Professor Birch, and then you go into the tall grass. After you meet your rival, more on them in a bit, you're treated to what is admittedly a bit of a funny moment, seeing Professor Birch get chased around by a wild Zigzagoon. I mean, come on, a grown man scared by this cute little face? This adorable little thing? Anyway, that's when you get to pick your starter Pokemon. The starter selection to this game is actually incredibly solid, and every single one of the options are fantastic. There's the water starter Mudkip, which eventually turns into Swampert, a water ground type Pokemon that has perhaps the best type combination in the game as far as offense and defense are concerned. There's the fire starter Torchic, which eventually evolves into Blaziken, perhaps the best offensive Pokemon that you can get in the main game. And lastly, there's the grass starter Trico, who bucks the trend of bulky defense-first grass-type starters by evolving into Sceptile, an incredibly quick Pokemon that is more offensive-oriented. There's really no bad option in this game, but if you want a Pokemon that will make the game easy, especially in the first half, Take it from me, Mudkip is the way to go. The first 4 gym leaders can barely touch Mudkip, and especially its evolutions, Marshtomp and Swampert, due to the latter two's water ground typing. But again, there's really no wrong answer here. Now, what about the rest of the region? How do they stack up to past games? Actually, they stack up pretty well. There's more than enough new Pokemon such as Absol, Hariyama, Manectric, Altaria, Sableye, Shiftry, Ludicolo, Ninjask, Aggron, Kecleon, a lot more. I could go on and on and on. I'll admit there are some who aren't my personal favorites and I'm not a big fan of, such as Bayonet, Wailord, Spindad, Nosepass, among others. Some people do like them and I can respect them. Sorry if these are your favorites, just how I'm feeling. You're more than welcome to disagree, but that's the best part. With the amount of variety this game has in terms of new Pokemon, chances are there are going to be several that you will love. There might not be a lot of Pokemon from past games, but there are some classics like Zubat, everyone's favorite Pokemon, Vulpix, Oddish, Tentacool, Magikarp, and more. There's also the Safari Zone, which allows you to catch stuff like Pikachu, Heracross, Phanpy, Rhyhorn, Pinsir, Dodrio, with even more Pokemon introduced after you beat the game. After you make your selection, you save the professor and are then sent to fetch your rival, who is Birch's kid. You fight your rival, come back to the professor, and are then sent on your way to your Pokemon adventure. Now we can see what this game has to offer. With this being Pokemon's 3rd generation of games, gameplay-wise, how different is it compared to previous games? To be honest, it's pretty much the same. Emerald for the most part is very similar to past games up to this point. The battle system remains the same, following a lot of the rules established in turn-based RPGs up to this point. In terms of battling, a Pokemon's attack and special attack stat determines the power of moves based on their typing and not the nature of the move itself. For example, all fire-type moves are considered special regardless of what the move is, so moves like Fire Punch, where you would think it would actually be considered physical or use the attack stat because, well, it's a punch, that's not the case. This is effectively the last we see of this type of battle mechanic until Generation 4, where the physical and special move split is properly done. In terms of Pokemon selections, early on, there's your Rattata clone in Zigzagoon, your Pidgey clone in Tailo, and your Caterpie Weedle clone in Wurmple. Nothing groundbreaking so far, except that you do get to see an early instance of split evolution with Wurmple, which has 2 separate evolution lines that is really damn hard to explain. Chuggaaconroy actually did a good job of breaking it down, and you can find that clip in the video's description. It's also early in the game where you actually notice the introduction of a new mechanic called abilities. They provide a passive effect, whether it would be in battle or in the overworld, and they can be a real game changer depending on what your Pokemon's ability is. For example, Zigzagoon's ability is Pickup, which means there's a chance that it will pick up a random item after every battle, and it's a fantastic way to pick up free potions, Pokeballs, and even rare candies if you're lucky enough. That alone can make the game incredibly easy, depending on what you get. Have you ever had a team of 6 Zigzagoons giving you a ton of free items after a couple of battles? It's the best feeling in the world. Ninjask's ability is Speed Boost, which literally increases your speed after every turn, which is damn good. Of course, there are some abilities that are complete duds, such as Sturdy, which in Emerald only prevents the use of one-hit KO moves like Guillotine, Sheer Cold, and Fissure, and there's a good chance you might play the entire campaign without ever running into these kinds of moves. So, what's the point of this ability in the context of this game? Regardless, abilities are one of the most influential mechanics to the franchise that Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald first introduced. The gym leaders in this game are pretty good, actually. None of them are bad or forgettable, and some provide a hell of a challenge. In Emerald, you got Roxanne, Brawley, Watson, Flannery, Norman, your father, Winona, Tate, and Lysa, who are a pair of twins who you have to fight at the same time in a doubles battle, and Juan, who looks a bit like Gomez Addams from the Addams Family. Depending on how you have your team made, Brawley, Wallace, Winona, and Norman could potentially be very problematic when battling them. Overall, the gym leaders are solid. Are they the best group of gym leaders that we've had? Probably not, but they're still a fun bunch. As far as the presentation is concerned, I dare say that it's still pretty good, even in 2020. The graphics are very good for the Game Boy Advance, a definite step up from Generation 2. The art style is visually appealing, and the music, my god, the music is great. Pokemon has always done a great job with the soundtrack, and Emerald did not disappoint one bit. Junichi Masuda, who worked on the game for Emerald as well as everyone else who were involved, did a great job creating unique tracks for different towns, battles, and cutscenes throughout the game. While I wish certain tracks weren't used for multiple towns and routes, I certainly am not complaining at all. The Gym Leader battle theme might be one of my favorites in the entire game. There's also Pokemon contests, which were first introduced in Ruby and Sapphire. They're not battles per se, but more like beauty pageants, and these contests make use of 5 unique stats called condition, and those are beauty, tough, cuteness, coolness, and smartness, and you use Pokemon moves in a totally different way than you would in a battle. There are 2 rounds to Pokemon contests. There's the opening round where the audience judges how much your Pokemon embodies the condition the contest is about, and the only way to increase your condition is with Pokeblocks, little candies you make with berries that you find throughout your adventure. Then there's the second round where you use your battle moves to impress the actual judges, and each move is categorized by one of the 5 conditions, and you get more points by using moves that match that contest's condition. Like Pokemon gyms, you have to pretty much go through all the contests if you want to be considered top of the class. Winning each of the contests nets your Pokemon a prize ribbon that says which rank and type of contest your Pokemon won. The 4 ranks are Normal, Super, Hyper, and Master, and must be done in that order. It's a neat little distraction that is totally optional and is a refreshing change of pace. As with every game, you got an evil team that you have to encounter time and time again and thwart their plans. But in Emerald, there are actually 2 antagonistic teams, Team Aqua and Team Magma, rival teams whose sole goals are to expand the world's oceans and landmass respectively because reasons. After beating Roxanne and getting your first gym badge, you essentially become an errand boy for the Devon Corporation for a while, who give you a Pokénav, which is a cell phone of sorts where you can call some of your opponents, see if they want a rematch, check your world map, etc, etc, etc. From that point, you're thrust into the rest of the region, encountering your rival Wally, who becomes your secondary rival, Team Magma and Aqua, and beating the gym leaders. Nothing groundbreaking if I do say so myself, but for the 3rd generation of Pokemon games, I think it's enough. Unlike Team Rocket in previous games, Team Aqua and Team Magma's plans have devastating effects on the world and nearly destroy it. This eventually has an effect in the overworld late in the game, where the legendary Pokemons Kyogre and Groudon create an everlasting drizzle and drought on certain parts of the map, and even has the rain dance and sunny day effect on battles in those affected areas. It's a great way to show the impact these legendary Pokemon have on the world, and you get to hear this tremendous track immediately after both teams trigger the near end of the world. The game has you retrieve Rayquaza. Rayquaza? I don't know, I've never been able to properly catch the correct pronunciation. To help calm down Kyogre and Groudon and send both of them to the room like they were kids who flung spaghetti all across the dining room. The story doesn't trigger philosophical debates over the moral implications of catching Pokemon that Black and White has, or deal with one of your friend's own mother abandoning her in a Pokefield madness quite like Sun and Moon, but it is a definite step up compared to past games in terms of the stakes involved. For as bad as Team Rocket was in past games, they never started the end of the world and nearly saw it to completion. But even if there aren't any monumental changes to the core game, there are still some fun features sprinkled throughout your adventure. Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald introduce secret bases. Using the move's secret power, you can turn special areas on the map into little forts or tree houses where you can place items such as Pokédolls, carpets, etc. It's actually really fun, and it's a great way to show off your creativity in front of your friends. You can get this move about midway through the game, and by mixing records with your friends who also have the game, you can visit them in their secret bases on the map and even battle them once per day. It's a great incentive to have a buddy who also has the game and link up with. There are also some unique Pokemon that are very interesting to catch. Spinda's gimmick is that they have little spot patterns, and there's almost no two Spinda that gave the same pattern. There's the Nincada family, which actually evolved into two Pokemon, Ninjask and Shedinja. If you have an open slot in your team and an extra Pokeball when Nincada evolves at level 20, not only do you get Ninjask, but also Shedinja, whose own gimmick is that it has only 1 HP, but can only be damaged by weather hazards, status ailments, and super effective moves. It's strange, but a worthwhile challenge having one on your team. You get all 8 badges as with every game, go through one more dungeon in Victory Road, and go for a gauntlet of trainers called the Elite Four before you go and face the champion. There's Sydney, who's a Dark type user, Phoebe, the Ghost type user, Glacia, the Ice type user, and Drake, the Dragon type trainer. Because of course we need a tough Dragon type Pokemon trainer at the end of the game. It's tradition. The champion in Emerald is actually different from Ruby and Sapphire's champion. Throughout the game, you meet this stranger named Steven Stone, and in Ruby and Sapphire, he actually ends up being the champion you face. But in Emerald, you face Wallace, who was previously the final gym leader in Ruby and Sapphire. It made for an interesting twist, but to be honest, I much prefer Steven than Wallace as the champion. No offense to Wallace, but Steven is far more interesting. You get more of a chance to establish a personal connection with him during your adventure, and in my humble opinion, Steven and his Pokemon are a lot cooler than Wallace and his Pokemon. You beat Wallace and become the new champion, but that's not necessarily the end of the game. Before we get to that, I do feel like I need to address one common criticism a lot of people have with Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, and that is the water. My god, I never realized until I replayed this game recently that there is a lot of water to traverse after you get your 6th gym badge. I realized there was a major criticism in the remakes, but I didn't think it was that bad in Emerald, and I couldn't be more wrong. I know surfing and going through water was something you did in previous games, but I don't remember ever being this bad. There is so much water, nearly no way to see how much you have to travel unless you check your map every 10 bloody seconds, and the variety of Pokemon to catch is as shallow as a kiddie pool. There's Tentacool, Wingull, Wailord, Magikarp. That's it! There's nothing incredibly interesting or worthwhile to catch that you probably haven't already encountered multiple times up to this point. I would have loved to see older Pokemon like Staryu, Quagsire, Mantine make an appearance. It would at least incentivize having to slot through all this water. Give us something unique or fun, or at least some variety to catch that doesn't involve having to go through underwater later in the game. But I digress. You may have noticed that I barely talked about the rival you have from the start, and that's because I don't think your rival's any good. From the start, your rival's very positive and seemingly uninterested for the supposed rivalry you two have, or at least the game wants you to think, and it pretty much stays that way throughout the game. Now, they never really say that they want to beat you or have to become the best, but it's really not that interesting. There's no animosity, there's no banter between the two of you, no character development, no real charm that past and future rivals exhibit. Every time you beat them, it doesn't feel all that great. It just feels like a roadblock that you just have to go through, not something that you look forward to. Aside from them saying they want to make friends with Pokemon, you pretty much don't really know why they're even on this huge journey to begin with. They don't really help you fight either of the two evil teams, that you don't fight them at Victory Road. I dare say that your primary rival in Emerald might just be the weakest in the whole franchise, to be honest with you. I'm not asking for another Blue, but I pretty much checked out every time I have to face your rival in Emerald. But I did say primary rival in Emerald. See, in Emerald there's a secondary rival named Wally, who you first encounter in Petalburg and actually help him catch his first Pokemon, which is Ralts. Wally's a sickly kid who went to move to Verdanturf Town for the cleaner air, but Wally quickly decides he wants to prove how strong he is by going on his own Pokemon adventure. When you first fight Wally, he's clearly not a great trainer and his Ralts is not really strong at all, but he refuses to give up. He wants to show that he can hold his own and he sets off on his own adventure and eventually makes it all the way to Victory Road, and it's one of the last fights you have before you have to take on the Elite Four. Wally's great and really should have been given more screen time throughout your adventure. He started out as this wimpy, low self-esteem kid who needed help just to catch a Pokemon. But by the end, he's confident, more mature, and more than a competent enough of a trainer to get to this point in Victory Road. Where was this with your primary rival? How can they be so one-dimensional when you introduce a secondary rival who's more interesting, relatable, and someone who you actively root for to succeed? It's really weird. Here's how I don't love the rival that you get at the start of the game. But do you know what I do love? The post-game content. I mentioned earlier in the video that the post-game in Emerald is just fantastic. Yeah, there are some things I don't like, but the pros far outweigh the cons. After you beat the game, you have the option of selecting which roaming legendary you get to chase, Latios or Latias. But regardless of who you pick, they're a fantastic addition to your team if you actually manage to find them. You can fight and catch both Kyogre and Groudon in separate places in the region, but you also have to find them. There's also the Regis, a trio of awesome looking legendary Pokemon named Regirock, Regice, and Registeel, who have a bizarre method of capturing them that involves having both Wailord and Relicanth in your party, and also be able to somehow read Braille. Yeah, that language that deaf and blind people use sometimes, that one. You have to learn how to read it, and there's nothing in the game that can teach you Braille, and it's overall a real pain in the ass for a kid who had no access to the internet until 2008 and no real way of learning Braille. It's pretty complex, but it's a worthwhile venture for 3 strong Pokemon. Now, that's not to say I don't like knowing Braille or I didn't like having to learn it. I think a lot of people, whether or not they need it, would benefit a lot from learning it. But when you put it behind a puzzle in a game and you have no way of giving the player the tools to learn it, that's where you lose me. But there's 2 things that I absolutely love about the postgame. The first one is that a new section of Meteor Falls opens up late in the game after you beat the Elite Four. You actually get to fight Steven, and he's definitely the hardest fight in the game up to this point. His team is not only composed of incredibly tough Pokemon such as Aggron and Metagross, but his entire team is at least level 75. Wallace the champion's strongest Pokemon is Milotic at level 58, so yeah, there is a big jump in difficulty right there. The other thing I love about the postgame is the Battle Frontier, a brand new facility that provides players with several different battle mechanics and ways to play. Some of these facilities are more complete versions of the Battle Tents, which are like mini variants of the Battle Frontier you encounter throughout your adventure. There's the Battle Factory, which allows you to use rental Pokemon, the Battle Dome, which is a single elimination tournament where the fights are tougher the more you win, the Battle Tower, which is just a gauntlet of matches, the Battle Arena, which has you fight trainers while also trying to impress judges, the Battle Pike, which has you go through a maze of sorts with different traps and fights, and you have to pick which route you go to. The Battle Paddles, which are just regular battles except the Pokemon select the moves. The trainer has no say whatsoever in what they do. Lastly, there's the Battle Pyramid, which has you traverse a multi-level pyramid full of wild Pokemon, trainers, and very little visibility. Each facility has their own Frontier Brain, which is the Battle Frontier's version of a gym leader, but to fight them you have to beat their respective facilities multiple times without failing once. Beating them gives you a silver symbol, and in order to get a gold symbol, you need to beat the facilities several more times without fail. And the battles against the Frontier Brains are no joke. I know I said Steven was the hardest fight in the game, but that's a bit of a half-truth. He's the hardest fight if you never fight the Frontier Brains. But the Frontier Brains are in a league above Steven. It's not because their teams are level 100 or anything like that, but the teams they have are either constructed in such a manner that you'll need competitive level Pokemon to stand a chance against them, or in the cases of some of these brains, have legendary Pokemon on their teams. When you fight Brandon, the Pyramid Frontier brain, the first time his whole team are Regirock, Regice, and Registeel, and in the Gold Symbol fight, his team is Moltres, Articuno, and Zapdos. How is that even fair? Or what about Annabelle? The first time you have to fight Annabelle, you have to fight Entei, and while the second time you have to fight Raikou and Latios. Come on! Look, I have no problem with the difficulty spike. I welcome it. But in order to get all 7 gold symbols, you pretty much need to be well versed in Pokemon breeding, EV training, and natures and everything about competitive Pokemon battling. But the game doesn't really tell you about some of these mechanics, and it's honestly a bit unfair. I'm lucky enough to be pretty knowledgeable about these competitive Pokemon mechanics, but the average player in 2005 probably didn't, and it comes off as a bit cheap. You think an 8-year-old is going to firmly grasp the concept of EV training and IV breeding just to have a realistic chance of beating the Battle Frontier? But even with that, I still think the Battle Frontier is an incredible addition to the game, and it adds hours and hours of game time with all these new and different battle mechanics and that don't get old or feel like it's just padding the length of the game for no reason. Even if you never get a chance to fight one of the Frontier Brains, it's almost impossible to not have a ton of fun with at least one of the battle facilities. And I haven't even begun to talk about some of the other legendary Pokemon you can catch. If you had to pick to try and catch Latios first, you can actually try and catch Latias later and vice versa, as well as Deoxys, Ho-Oh, Lugia, and even Mew. Unfortunately, you're going to need the E-Reader, which is a long forgotten relic of the Game Boy Advance era. So unless you somehow got one or don't mind using cheating devices to get them, there's no way to get those legendaries without trading from another player. Regardless, that shouldn't stop anyone from enjoying the postgame. Now, I wish I could talk about everything that Emerald has to offer, what I like, what I don't like, but admittedly, we would be here for a very, very, very long time, so I thought I should share some interesting things, some very neat things that I thought were actually pretty cool or very weird in Pokemon Emerald. There's this dude in Fortree City that sends its Wingull to send a letter to Mossdeep City, but when you go to Mossdeep, the recipient of that letter is a little girl. What's weird is that her brother says the dude in Fortree is her boyfriend. That guy looks like an adult and the girl looks like she's in elementary school. Do I have to call Chris Hansen for this one? Speaking of Mossdeep, after you become the champion, if you go to Steven's house, you're actually rewarded with Beldum, which eventually evolves into Metagross, Steven's ace Pokemon and one of the best in the entire game. What about the Battle Frontier? If you have a Wailmer pail, you go to this weird tree, spray some water, and it actually turns out to be a Sudowoodo, which is a bit of a callback to Gold, Silver, and Crystal, and that's pretty cool. After you fight Sudowoodo, if you surf down and to the left, you'll eventually reach a cave that only has Smeargle in them. Neat. What isn't neat is trying to get Feebas. See, Feebas is more or less this game's Magikarp, in which it's completely worthless until it evolves into the incredible Milotic. Only way to catch it is by going to Route 19, surfing on it, and using a Super Rod to fish it out. Unfortunately, there are dozens of water tiles in that route, and Feebas is located in only 6 tiles. Just 6. And they're randomized. And there's no way to find out except with copious amounts of trial and error. God help me. So what do I think about Pokemon Emerald 15 years later? Honestly, I think it holds out pretty well. Sure, the battle system may not be as refined as it is today, but it's not the absolute broken mess that Red and Blue were, and people still love that game to this day. The graphics are great, the music is very, very nice. The story, while not super deep and complex, it's not non-existent, and there's a lot of fun stuff you can do in this game. The Pokemon roster is absolutely stellar at more than 300 if you include Pokemon that you can get in from other games in the 3rd generation. From the Postgame, the Battle Frontier is absolutely one of the best things going for it, and it's still one of the best things Pokemon has made in years. So between that and the main game, you got a good 30-40 hours into this classic, and honestly, 30-40 hours on the GBA, that's a really good thing. And sure, maybe it's not easy getting a copy of Pokemon Emerald today, but if you can find a way to play a copy of Pokemon Emerald, I highly recommend it. It's a great time. It's a great time. It's a lot of fun, and I'm not just saying this because this is my favorite Pokemon game. I really do think that this is a great Pokemon game in general, and a great game on the Game Boy Advance. So yeah, definitely get this game if you can. If you already have it, I'm sure you already know how good and how much fun this game is. So I don't know quite how to end this video except, well, this. Bicycle, bicycle, bicycle. I want to ride my bicycle, bicycle. Thank you so much for checking out my video. If you got to this point, I really do appreciate it. It's my first video I've ever done in this manner, so I hope you enjoy it, and hopefully I get better with more videos like these. I'm far from a polished YouTuber, but hopefully you guys like what you saw and are looking forward to more stuff. Leave a comment below if you want, subscribe to my channel, hit the bell icon to get notifications on my future videos, and I hope to entertain you all soon.